Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agent GTM podcast, where we talk to non-technical people that are able to build now with AI, build both agents and build actual applications and then deploy those to market and take them to market. So today we're joined by Madan who I worked with for years at Capital One. He spent a total of 10 years at Capital One and has since worked at Goldman Sachs, Berkadia, and Freddie Mac in product management roles. He is talking to us today about Koko Finance. It's an application he built using AI, totally no code, that helps people make better decisions about their credit cards. And what he's going to talk about with us today is not just building the application, the web app, which he talked with us about in a prior episode, but how he's turned that into an MCP server that both consumers and fintech startups can use. So I think it's an awesome example of someone who has taken his no-code projects to the next level and has pretty grand ambitions and goals for what he's going to do with this business. So I think it's worth taking a listen for anyone who is building with AI and wants to see some of the things that they may not be thinking about that they potentially should pursue. So thanks for listening to this episode. All right. Welcome, Madan, and for everyone listening, we are talking to Madan about an app and MCP server that he's now built with Koko Finance. If you have been following, we did a video with him earlier, a shorter video that gave kind of a high-level overview of what Koko is and why he built it and how he was approaching it. So we won't go through all of that detail, but just for anyone who may not have caught it, do you mind giving just a short introduction on yourself? Obviously, we used to work together at Capital One, so that's probably the most relevant, and you'll see how that ties in to what he's building. And then just give an overview of what you've been building, before the MCP stuff.
Absolutely. First off, Shalin, thank you for having me on again. You and I, as you said, we worked together at Capital One. So for context, I spent about a decade at Capital One, but have also where I was doing analytics along with product management. Especially the latter part of my stint at Capital One was doing a lot of product management, playing around a lot with master data. Now, after I left Capital One, had some stints at places like Freddie Mac, spent a few years at Goldman Sachs, which was kind of interesting on its own, and also spent some time at Berkadia. Berkadia, again, commercial real estate firm, which is a JV between Berkshire Hathaway and Jefferies. So I've been around the block for in terms of banks and financial services firms. The idea for Koko came up because, earlier last year, my son was going off to college and I had to figure out what's the best credit card to find for him. And my thought was, hey, if only I could use some of these AI models running around, and this is around summer of 2025, that the idea came to me that maybe this would be a good way to a good use case to build out an app. So with that in mind, I thought, let me use, an AI model. I mean, basically for me, it was Gemini, but using Gemini to figure out okay, can it help me find a new card? Can it help me compare cards? Can it help me, get the most out of the rewards or benefits that I have from my cards? I've been blessed that I could, have some some premium cards like Amex Platinum. But anybody who's used Amex Platinum knows that it has a steep annual fee. So figuring out how do you get the most out of that card becomes super important, because otherwise you're just keeping money on the table for Amex to pick up. So that was the thought behind Koko. And that is where, I think the last time when I spoke to you, Shalin, I had built out an app. It was a web app. And mind you, it has been a bit of a interesting learning for me, because like I said, I was doing analytics and product management, continued with product management after I left Capital One, have been a little distanced from actual getting my hands dirty in coding. But luckily, the developments of the last year where, starting with things like Replit and Lovable, which are people use for vibe coding. But looking at those, I realized that yes, I get a start with them, but I cannot build an entire product that is working. And that's where I switched over to Claude Code. Claude Code has been super helpful and in actually helping me get to a state where I have a I have a product that has been deployed. It is available for everybody to use. And at this point in time, I'm trying to move ahead and get more people to use my product.
Yeah, and the app, when we looked at the app, I found it to be super robust in terms of the ability to look through and find any credit card, um, track what's in my wallet. So here's the credit cards in my wallet, and then try to get suggestions on when and how to use those cards. Or
Right.
oriented towards a consumer making the best decision, like you said, getting
Absolutely.
the value out of a credit card. If you get the Amex Platinum, you should understand all the different benefits. I might have 2 or 3 cards in my wallet that I need to use effectively. So the thing that I think is most interesting is that you've added something that I think is more, a level more technical than many independent builders. There's a lot of people that are building vibe coded apps like we talked about, but you added MCP. So just for people who don't know what that is, could you give us a quick overview of what is MCP and what led you to the decision to add that into what you were doing with Koko?
So when I last spoke to you, Shalin, I think like I said, I had the app. But when I did a bit of market research, I realized that yes, there are a lot of people who are building apps like that. It's you see a lot of people who have built out, starting from like giants like Credit Karma or NerdWallet, all the way to a Product Hunt or some of the other product places. You're going to see a ton of apps which are talking about hey, let's talk about rewards optimization and how do you get the most out of a credit card. Now, when I thought about okay, where do I want to take this app forward? I think there are a few questions that came up. Right? Do I really want to be fighting out with so many others? But then I realized that hey, there are a ton of people who have already built these apps. There are people, again, building them out. I mean, if you look at Crunchbase or Y Combinator, you're going to see quite a few venture-funded apps that have been built out that are, hey, AI-based personal finance app or AI-based fintech. And then I realized that, hey, this infrastructure that I built out, data about 150 cards, includes their rewards programs, benefits, APRs, terms, all of those things. Everybody needs them. And that's when I said that, hey, maybe that would actually help me stand out a little from the rest of the crowd, when I said that hey, I'm not your competitor. I'm actually helping you build out your product and help you go to market faster, so that you don't have to build this infrastructure. I've already done it for you. But the question comes up is, okay, how do I make this data available, right? Is it just something like people download, or is it something like the more development oriented people would say, okay, can I have an API for it? But then when I looked up, as I was doing my research, I realized that everybody's actually building out AI agents. That's the talk on town. You've done a lot of work in about AI agents as well. And if I have to make my data available for people, it's not about people. It's about hey, how do I make the data in the format in such a way that it is easily consumed by an AI agent? And that's where MCP comes in. And MCP is an abbreviation of Model Context Protocol, where it allows AI agents to interact and extract data from other data sources. Now, so essentially you have an MCP client, which is your agent, and you're an MCP server. So what I thought was yeah, I have the data. I have it in a way that is structured in the right way, that I can build out an MCP server, so that what this helps me do is, yes, I can have anyone building out AI agents, and there are a ton of them in the Silicon Valley, a ton of them in New York who are doing this work. Hey, at least if they want to look for credit card data, for benefits data, if you want to do comparison, if you want to say that which card do I use when, or if you want to do things like, what's the break-even spend, or hey, should I renew my card? I mean, there's a ton of things that I had built out in my app itself. They start becoming available as a system call, either through an API or through an MCP call. So then others can just use my work and then layer on top their own workflows, their own business logic, and move ahead. It just helps them save time and money to go to market, right? So they can focus on their key pieces, rather than thinking about hey, I have to build this infrastructure for all of this work as well. That's the thought behind the MCP side. The other thing also I noticed was, when you talk about MCP, and if you have an MCP server, right, you actually get another set of users. So what that means is you can connect MCP to, say, your Claude or GPT, your chatbot, right? Or like Claude has Covert, you can just connect it to it, and you can start using it as if you're chatting with Koko. So that is a second class of second group of users that started coming in, because I've had situations where I've had somebody reach out to me saying that, hey, I saw that like you had an MCP box. I connected to it and I think this is cool. Can we talk about like how we could like use it more deeply? So it is those kind of things start popping up, which just keep a whole bunch of like new possibilities just open up for a.
Okay, so to make sure I understand, just to summarize for the listeners, so Koko initially allows I go to the Koko website, the web app, and I can filter and search and find information about credit cards. I can create a profile that has the information about which cards I keep in my wallet, and then I can kind of I can make decisions, but I do it all in the web app. And you're saying that now either I maybe use Claude more than I go to the website, which is possible. And I just want to ask those questions to Claude. Claude automatically knows when to go to Koko. Maybe I'm using Koko and like 5 other things. And that's for me individually as like a consumer. But you're saying maybe someone is a startup and they are, and this is something actually a startup that I'm working with, Madan and I were talking about this, Pangea, that helps people make travel decisions, and perhaps one of the inputs to helping them make a travel decision is knowing about their credit cards and the benefits that come with them. So that's an example of, like, Pangea wouldn't want to have to go set up a whole data infrastructure around credit card data. You have it, and then we could link into it. Is that an accurate summary?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, okay. Shalin. Because then, if you take Pangea's example, their focus is on travel and travel experiences, at least from what I understood. Credit cards might not be like their most biggest focus area, but from their users' perspective, this is, if I am planning travel, I think about what are the experiences I should look for, and how do I manage it and how do I pay for it. Right. So that's where like the credit card pieces come in. And if I have a card that gives me certain benefits like lounge accesses or hotels, any of those things, I want to be using it to improve the quality of experience that I have when I'm doing my travel. So that's where like the credit card piece comes in. But like you said, right? I mean, it's a bit of an add-on, which is kind of necessary. What Koko gives you is okay, I can just start using the calls and make a call to Koko and start using their data rather than building out their own infrastructure. So if I have to add new capabilities about travel planning, I can do it quickly.
Okay. So then it sounds so. Let's say I'm a builder. I'm using Lovable. I'm using Claude Code. I'm making cool apps. What would I need to do, or what did you need to do to then take that to the next level and say, okay, I've got this app that has a bunch of data in it, and now I want to make it available via MCP. How did you go about that process?
So one of the things I've realized, when I work with Claude Code, and I tend to treat it more like a team member rather than something as just a tool. And my approach has always been, when I'm vibe coding, is especially when I'm working with the Claude Code, is more about specifying hey, here's my vision. Here are the things that I want to achieve. Let's brainstorm together to figure out what are the things that is possible. So I was looking at, so basically this is the kind of prompt that I would do, right? So I'm looking at reviewing our compare cards capability, have some ideas to share, review the code base before we start brainstorming, right? So what that does is that what Claude Code will do, and I can say, also say that, hey, my priority is the REST APIs and MCP, right? And it would go through the Claude code base and then basically have an interactive conversation about saying, here's what I need to do. Yes. But does this make sense, Shalin? I mean, in terms of the approach that I'm saying is okay, review the code base. Here is the goal that I have. Let's work together. And then we do go a little deep into okay, what should the architecture look like? What should the UI look like? What should the developer's experience be? I mean, all of those things start coming up, but that's where I start, right? I mean, hey, start by this, review the code base. Where do we stand today? You're successful product manager. So, if you're working with an engineer, you probably would take the same approach, right? I mean, in the sense that, hey, I have a meeting with my engineering lead to say that, okay, here are some ideas. Here are some things that we want to do. Here's the reason for it. can you talk about, can we figure out, make sure that you have reviewed, what we have in place so that we can talk about how we go to this next level.
Yeah. So you went to Claude Code and you just said, hey, we're gonna build an MCP and then like talk through with Claude, like that was it. There was no.
So,
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, I know I'm making this sound really super simplistic, right? I mean, in the sense that before that, but look at this, right? I mean, hey, here is the things, like here is some gaps. It's showing me some gaps, certain patterns worth noting. But one of the things I had to do before that also was a lot of research and study of my own to understand, what does MCP do and how does it get to it, and make sure that I understand what is the direction I'm heading down. But at the same time, I treat Claude Code more as my engineer who would say that, where I could go to them and say, hey, review my quick code base, tell me what are the challenges, here are the areas that I want to take this to, how do I do this, right? So rather than essentially, let's put it this way, right? I mean, you do that as a single prompt for a lot of times when you're having your chat sessions where you're saying that, hey, here is the goal, here are some constraints, here's what I want you to do, and here's the format that I want it in. It's a little similar to that. It's just that you're tweaking it a little to make sure that you're asking Claude Code to focus on, hey, make sure that you work and review the code base and then give me some things to talk.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that's great. So you tell us a little bit about you started alluding to some of the use cases, but tell us a little bit about what your goals are and how some people are already using the MCP that you've set up.
So I have a couple of people who are evaluating the product right now. One of them, both are startups, and one of the startup is focused more on the rewards management use case where where people can come and say that okay, I have these cards. How do I get the most out of the rewards that I have or the benefits that the card offers? Now, granted, they may have a slightly different way of looking at things rather than what Koko does. But what Koko gives them is a way of saying that, okay, you still need the data, right? You still need a way of having a data store of pulling out, okay, how do I get the cards, if I pick, everybody talks about Amex Platinum, but if I talk about, say, Citi's American Airlines Executive Elite card, not exactly obscure, but at the same time, it is obscure enough, not too many people know about it. But then you want to be saying that, okay, this is your card. Yes, you're talking American Airlines. It's obvious from the card name, but what else does it offer? Right? I mean, that card offers you, hey, free Lyft rides for up to about $20 every month. But so it is things like those that would become genuinely helpful for this company that is doing rewards management. On the flip side, there's another company that is more about a personal finance advisor, or it's basically the app that they're building out. They are less focused on the rewards and they're more focused on, hey, what are the APRs that your card has and what kind of debt do you carry? And if that's the debt do you carry, how do you put a plan together to get out of debt? Super important use case, as important as the rewards management one. But again, for them, it's a similar thing that okay, how do I get to all of these, pieces where I can pick a random card, I get all of this information. If they need to, they can also get to work with my MCP server to figure out hey, has there been any changes for where hey, somebody just upped their APR or up their penalty or things like that to help people build out their own plan. So what my MCP server helps is that any kind of both of these apps are again use AI in building out their workflows. So their AI agents can directly talk to my MCP server, pull some of the data that they need as they move forward.
Okay. And then I don't think we've talked about this, but so the data is the crux of this, right? So anyone who's watching this or listening to this, their application is data centric. They could probably relate to this. But my question is, how do you have a process, and maybe Claude Code is involved in this, to maintain all that? Let's say tomorrow a new credit card launches, or the fee changes, or the APR changes, or whatever might happen. Do you have what's your process for managing and maintaining that in Koko?
So I have a job, a bi-weekly job basically that basically uses Gemini and some other, there's an API called Serper. So what the job does is, and again, this job was developed using Claude Code as well, because to your point, I think the success of Koko or any of these apps is directly related to how relevant the data that they carry. So the job out here is to work with Gemini, because Gemini connects to Google, so you can use Google's search to figure out a lot of this information. I have a job that runs every other week that pulls all of this data together, formats it. I review the data, make sure that yes, there are no hallucinations or there's no weird data stuff that is happening. There are times I would even at times have manually verified things by going to the issuer's website and saying, if I see something really off, is this really happening? Sometimes an issuer might change their annual fee, or they might change a new sign-on bonus or things of that kind. So that part, yes, absolutely. But that part has been there from the very beginning, from Koko V1. It's not new. I'm just that data job becomes a lot more relevant now, because part of the offering that I have through Koko is also access to that data.
That's very cool. That makes a lot of sense. So then what's your, the reason I'm asking this is a lot of listeners or a lot of people are building all this stuff on their own, right? Everyone's vibe coding something. And some people are doing it as a personal project, side project. Some people really think it's a big business opportunity. What are your kind of medium and long term goals, or short and medium term goals for Koko, for the MCP, for some of those conversations you mentioned you're having with startups?
So I have a 3-level plan, right? Yes, obviously I would want some of the larger issuers, just like our former employer Capital One, to be using Koko as well, but you need to earn their trust. You can't just go there directly, right? So the thought here is, can I start by gaining some credibility with people in the startup world who are starting to build things out, and and I offer them the infrastructure and start building out a user base for myself for Koko. The next in line was, I was thinking the medium term would be to go to some of the regional banks and credit unions as well, to talk to them about saying that, hey, can you start looking at some of these capabilities? You would also need data for whether it is for your analytics side, whether it is customer acquisition processes, to figure out, okay, if you allowing people to compare your product against others, how would you do that? So that's the short, immediate, near term is absolutely startups. Medium term is regional banks and credit unions mainly. And assuming I get there and I get the traction, that's when I hope to go to places like Capital One and see if I have to pitch Koko.
That's great. I love that. What I think is so interesting about it is, one, those are big goals. I really like that, because a lot of people have varying levels of what they're trying to do with their AI projects. This is great because we had an initial conversation where you show us the web app, and the evolution and the thinking that went into the evolution, I think, is really interesting for people to see. What's your biggest advice as it relates to MCP servers and just the idea of MCP for people who are listening who've never thought about it? What are your suggestions for when they might want to consider something like this?
Yeah. So I'm talking, all of this work that I've done is primarily around Koko and credit cards, and I have some, I'm going to say, users in mind, right? About who can use Koko, whether it's the founders and the startups, or whether it is medium term like credit unions. But if I take a step back out here, ideally MCP as it stands is mainly protocol to allow AI agents to consume your content. I don't want to say data, I'm going to say content. The AI agent could be something that a startup is building or somebody in a corporate setup is building as a part of their broader workflow. But the AI agent could just simply be, allowing Claude or GPT to use your product, right? It could be as simple as that, right? So what MCP opens up is, hey, if you're thinking about, hey, I have this idea and I want to use, help people do a certain set of actions, right? Could be anything. You want, today, the way the world is going, all of us, you and I included, I think if we are to research something, if we have to find something, we don't use Google, we go to either GPT or Claude or Gemini. You want to be able to be there in a place where, your work can be accessed through Gemini or through Claude. We think about MCP as a platform for that. Does that make sense, Shalin?
Yeah,
I mean, that way it is, because all of those are like, they are MCP clients themselves. So all of them can access MCP servers. So then you are opening yourself up to saying that, hey, I have an AI service that I can present, that you can access through Claude, and then you can basically have an interactive session with my service.
Yeah, the thing I'll add to for people is I know the AI world is getting so complicated. There's skills is one element of you're calling in rather than just talking to the LLM, you're having a specialized function or guidance that you're giving the LLM in that call. MCP is a way for you to go out to the skills are kind of on your computer or something that you maintain. But MCP is that plus, like you said, not only data, but content that you're going out externally and getting. So rather than me talking to Claude about credit card stuff generically, where it's going out to the internet and getting whatever information, I could use your MCP, I could use my skill on something about how I think about my finances or whatever it might be, all of which is making the answers in the conversation that I'm having with my LLM that much more powerful. Exactly. And that's just the individual use case. And that's for anyone who's listening who wants to bring in credit card data, you can go to Koko and just set it up. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me show you. So this is Claude Code, right? And the way you set one up, set up an MCP box is you have something called as connectors, and I have set Koko up as one of the connectors. Yeah. So when I have, I can then start by saying, hey, I have an American Express Platinum card and Cap One Venture Rewards card. I can, if I want to say, use Koko sometimes, but it works without it as well. But then you kick off the workflow, right? When are you planning to London, right? Maybe say solo 4 to 5 days. What are your main goals? And I could say, use Amex Platinum points and so on. What kind of trip? Let's say mid-range. And basically all it has done is it has gone to Koko and it is connecting it in the background. If you say it is saying getting this, it is calling this get card benefits from Koko, and it is essentially working using Koko's tools to build out a itinerary for you based on some of the inputs that.
That's cool. So we'll talk a little bit while it's still running and then maybe show the results at the end. Sure. But yeah, so I think the use case makes a lot of sense. You said you're and just to, again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier, but just one way to think about it for the average user of Claude or ChatGPT is rather than just having a chat conversation that's generic, you can connect to an MCP that has data that you know and you trust. And like we said, that's separate from the use case of a bank or a business using it. Okay, and then tell us what it did and how this is different than what I might get.
Here's what it did, right? I mean, it looked at the cards that I had given, so Amex Platinum with Capital One Venture Rewards. It has the annual fees out there as well. Now it says, okay, use the right card for each purchase. For flights to London, use Amex Platinum because this is where you're going to you have 5 times, for book 5 extra points based on if you book through Amex Travel. You can, any US carrier, you are things around airline fees. Now then you also have around hotels. Now it gives you 2 choices. I mean, if you're just using Capital One Travel, here's what you get. If you use Amex Travel, here's something else. Food in London or anything to do, what do you want to use and how do you do that? Because hey, Cap One has no foreign transaction fees. This would be better. If you are doing Amex Platinum perks only, here are things that you can use for traveling, whether it is lounges, whether if you're using global entry, if you're renting a car, right? And then again, hey, if you're redeeming points, here are some things that you could do as well.
That's really cool.
And that's where I'm saying, right? I mean, this is more about you. This is a travel use case because this is Koko, and Koko talks about, credit cards and premium and travel cards. But this could be your use case, right? Which would be completely different. You might be focusing on the researching, schools, or you might be researching, hey, something around music. But then chances are in today's world, there will be a lot of people who would be going into Claudes and the Chat GPTs of the world to do their research. Your tool becomes a way of providing content where your users are.
Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, awesome. I think that's a great overview for everyone. And I think that the people can, you can start using the Koko MCP. And then two, if you're building something where you have data, and like you just said, it could be in any domain. And if you're building an app and people are using it, or people find value in it, but maybe they don't go to the app as much as you want them to, then you can think about making all that data available via MCP. And like you showed us, you just set it up with Claude Code, and it's a...
Yeah, and so I'll be honest. I mean, I know I was trying to simplify things a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of these sessions that need to take place. It's not going to happen in just a single session that hey, just one prompt is not going to do it for you. I mean, there is some background work that you need to do, but I treat Claude Code as my engineer or my engineering group. So that way I just continue the way I would do as if I was a product manager, where I would go to my engineering lead and say, hey, here is something that I want to work on. Here are the requirements. There are times I've written PRDs as well and uploaded it to Claude Code, but the approach is pretty much the same. Hey, here are the goals. Here's what I want to have. Review the code base. Let's figure out how we can take this forward. What are the basically asking things like what is involved, what kind of external, what are the things that are missing that need to be built out. I even go to the extent of asking Claude Code, hey, give me a detailed task list of all of the things that you need to do. Sometimes I even ask that okay, can I have parallel Claude Code sessions working so that I can parallelize things rather than just me having one interaction with Claude Code. So there are multiple techniques that you can have, but then the gist of it is hey, think about it as your engineer or your engineering rather than just saying that, hey, it's a tool.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing all this detail and talking through it. And then just tell everyone we'll include it in the notes and everything, but tell everyone the website to go to get all the information about Koko.
It's kokofinance.net. I'll of course share the link with you, Shalin, as well. But yeah, go to kokofinance.net. There are instructions on connecting to the MCP server. There's always a free subscription. Just go out there, connect it to Claude, try it out. And yeah, share feedback. I mean, if there are things that you see, things that you like, things that you want to see in there, would love to know more.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. Hopefully next time we have an even bigger update about all the great banks and customers that you're working with, and we can keep this going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shalin.
All right, thank you
for having me.